Into order. Mr. Secretary, would you like to take the roll for us?
Mayor Hodges. Here. Council President Johnson. Here. Chair Ways and Means, Councilmember Quincy.
Here.
Mr. Wheeler.
Here.
President Tab.
Here. And I will just note that member Carol Becker is on her way and should be here shortly. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. First on our item is the new business. Updated information as to the proposed maximum tax levies for 2016 based on the August 12th budget address. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Parcels that have had no change in the classification, so they've been homesteaded throughout the period, and there was no permitted improvements. So all the valuation changes are driven by the market rather than improvements. And these are for evaluations January 2nd, 2011 through January 2nd, 2015. Of these 52,000 parcels, approximately 27,170 or 52.2% of the parcels will have a city tax decrease under the mayor's budget as proposed on August 12th. There's a more detailed table shown on page 1 by the individual brackets. Also enclosed is the draft format of the appropriate resolutions that the board will be acting on today with regards to their responsibilities for the truth and taxation process.
All right. Does anyone have any questions or comments on item number 1? Okay. Then let's, I don't think we have to take any action on that. I just would like to then move on to item number 2, which is consideration of setting the maximum tax levies payable in 2016 with regards to the Charter of Truth and Taxation compliance. Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move the action that I have passed out to members here, and there are some available at the clerk's or at Mr. Qualley's desk.
Yeah, that's it. Take one.
The underlying motion? No, I'm moving a separate motion. Yeah, I think that's in order, is it not, Mr. Qualley? The separate motion is in order? Am I correct?
The question I had in this.
Make sure our microphones are on.
The question I had, Madam Chair, was whether or not we would move the underlying motion and this would be considered an amendment or a substitute. I'm seeing a nod from the city clerk.
Thank you.
We don't technically move the budget. We're just addressing the maximum tax levies.
Yeah.
And that with regards to the budget. One of the difficulties this year is that in the budget, all the levies with regards to the pension funds are shown as a composite number rather than a breakout by the individual levies and that. I mean,
This is merely a procedural question. I don't have a question about the data itself. The procedural question is, do we need to move what was put before us and then do this as a substitute?
That's how we would do it at the park board. So, you know, I would certainly entertain that motion. So why don't we move item 2, the consideration of setting the maximum tax levy.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Now, President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to move a substitute then, which reflects, and it actually has two items in that are changes from the mayor's budget. The first has to do with our obligations to the closed pension funds. And at the close of June 30th, 2014, after investment returns were received from MRF, MRF exceeded the 80% funding threshold for full merger into CARA's general account. So as a result, on January 2nd of this year, MRF was fully merged and is no longer a separate account. Based in part on that and other changes in the actuarial assumptions passed by the state during the legislative session, including reducing the assumed investment rate of 8.5% to 8.0% for all of the state's public pension funds as part of the omnibus pension bill. During mid-July, PARA was waiting for updated actuarial reports for both of two of our closed pensions funds, and those are the fire and police. And so as a result of the above changes in the pension law and the levels of amortization aids for Minneapolis Police Relief Association and Minneapolis Fire Relief Association, the city's property tax that's needed to meet its financial obligations to PARA are $2.2 million lower, or $25,100,000 rather than the August amount of $27,310,000. So there is a change of $2.2 million to the city's. My motion has a $2.2 million reduction in the pension obligations, which fully satisfies our pension obligations to the state of Minnesota for the 2016 year.
All right.
And I think this is perhaps more controversial than the second item, so I would wait and move the second item separately.
Okay.
Okay, so we
Sounds
could
good.
discuss this. So I will move this change, which reduces the pension levy by $2.210 million.
Okay, and for purposes of discussion, I will second that. So I think at this point in time, I think there is a good reason for having lots of discussion. So I would love to hear from each and every person about this, because I think this is something that is very important and that we discuss on air. I think my question would be is, do we want to have staff, so just give us a summary about why we are in this position so that people in TV land can understand that? Do you want to just give us a quick background on that, Jack?
Before the legislature met this spring, Murph was segregated account until January 2nd when it was fully merged in the PARA's general account. Before this year, then, under the legislation that merged PARA, or merged Murph into PARA, there were various obligations for the Murph employers. One of them was called an employer additional contribution, which was set by statute at $3.9 million a year. The other one was called the employer supplemental contribution, which was in a range that had a minimum of $27 million a year and a maximum of $34 million a year. And then there was this 2031 true-up, because all these pension payments and the closed pension funds go through 2031. This true-up was part of the original bill. We didn't have a number because you'd have to know the investment rate that happened and all the actuary stuff that happened to 2031. So there was this potential liability and we didn't have any handle on the magnitude of it. In that. Okay. After Murph was fully merged in the PARA's general account, the true-up went away because it loses all its identity. It's fully merged in the PARA's general account. The legislature was meeting, and back in December, they were talking, they knew Murph was going to be fully merged, and there was discussions, and some of the legislators wanted all the savings of the merger to go to the state contribution, because the state also contributes to Murph. During the legislative session, the investment assumption rate was already so lowered from 8.5% to 8%. With all these combinations then, the legislature adopted in the pension bill in May, it eliminated the additional contribution for the employers, and the supplemental contribution was changed so that the Murph employers owe $31 million in total in 2016, and the state was taking all basically the savings from everything. And in 2017, they're sharing the savings. So in 2017, the Murph employers owe $21 million. There's no longer an additional employer contribution, and there's no longer a true-up phase. This was one piece of the puzzle when we managed the pension plans together. The other two pieces involve police and fire closed funds. They're also affected by the actuary assumption change on investments. And also, when we started the pension management plan, it was back in 2002, and then we went through the dot-com bubble, and we went through the housing bubble. And part of the aid, amortization aids the police and fire receive for fire are dependent upon the fire surcharges. So when market values on houses go down, the fire surcharge on the insurance goes down. And you probably all remember when we had the Cash for Clunkers program, because nobody was buying automobiles, which motor vehicle taxes provide the cash for the police amortization aid. So we had very uncertainty of these levels. We felt certain they were going to recover. We didn't know at what pace they were going to recover. So we basically went along with our conservative estimates on those amortization aids. Then the state entered into the study period where they're going to have an extended period to look at the investment assumptions. The study period originally was supposed to run through 2017, but they decided they had reached their conclusions, and this legislative session, they took action. We received the actuary updates on police and fire in late July. So we had the final two pieces of the three pieces puzzle that remained, and the pieces that regards the property taxes now total 25.1 million as compared to the 27.3 million last year. And with the additional employer drop in 2017, the 2017 property tax level will go down to 19.9 for all consolidated these three pension fund obligations for the city. So what we have before us is the mayor's budget was 27,310, which wasn't privy to all the information, and now we have this updated information, which property tax wise can be 25.1 from a levy perspective to meet our obligations to these closed pension funds. In 2017, it goes down an additional 5.2 million and then stays flat at that level out to 2031. It's not a drop and bounce back. It goes down in 16 and it goes down further in 17 and then it stays flat out to 2031, which we get to 2031 and our property tax commitment to these pension funds will drop from 19.9 down to 0, and who's ever mayor and council at that point in time will surely get reelected for that. So.
All right.
Very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks. That's very helpful. Sandra, do you want to I know that there are some concerns and questions on the part of the mayor's office, and so would you want to address those? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the first set of questions that we might want to ask is of our IGR staff, because my understanding is that this year's, the dollars given to us by the state this year for this were somewhat embattled at the state, and that I see Gene Ranieri rolling his eyes, and that in the future, that it's not certain what they will do with these dollars in the future. So I'd actually appreciate if Mr. Ranieri could speak to the legislative context in which the decisions were made around these dollars this year, and what certainty or lack thereof we might have in the future.
Thank you. I think that's a great idea.
Madam Chair, members of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, my name is Gene Ranieri. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the City of Minneapolis. In the 2015 session, pensions were a big discussion item. 8% was one of the items talked about, the investment return. In the terms of MRF, it all goes back probably to about July of 2014 when the PERA board issued a report dealing with the authorization or the review actuarial report, and said that we saw the actual amount of money necessary to pay for MRF would come down from around $51 million to around $37 million. That then people were surprised. Why did that happen? Some of the reasoning is, one, there was large contributions made by the city of Minneapolis and the other governmental agencies, as well as the state, to fund MRF from about 2012 to 2014 at around $51 million a year. The legislature, other things was great investment. We had great things happening. We couldn't predict that. It was amazing. So some of the discussions in committee and in meetings were maybe we should just continue to fund it at the level and pay it off in a couple of years. Well, that didn't seem to sell very well. The Senate, on the other hand, decided maybe what we ought to do is since we owe, if the number amount is 37 and the state's putting in 24 and the locals are putting in around 27, let's do proportional reduction. Let's just bring it down. The House liked the idea of proportional reduction, but they defined proportional reduction differently. They said, let's have the locals for the next couple of years pay what they're paying now, and all the savings come to the state. So in effect, that $37 million nut that we need to crack, we need to fund, the locals are now putting in 31. They'll continue to put in 31, and then the state will put in 16 rather than the current 24. But then as part of compromise of the legislature, what came again in the final bill was that stayed, that $6 million contribution from the state to help us and all our other partners, plus the 21 got you to 20, or 31 got you to 37. They said, okay, in the next biennium, starting on the 1st of July, 2017, we will put in $16 million, so lower the local governments by $10 million, basically to 21 and 16. So a little bit of trepidation that bill passed. That was a real tough battle. There was a big concern, particularly in the Senate and up to the last days of the session, about how much money should be for property tax relief from the state or for relief for pensions. And the Senate and the governor held firm that it should be proportional reduction, and the House wanted to go down to 6. The concern is in the future, can this deal hold? We're not sure. I mean, we came into the session thinking we had something, and we had something different. We're coming into now to the next session. It looks like 16 million and will be the state share to us. We hope, but we're not sure. I mean, and that's everything. And every time, because you have a biennial appropriation, there's nothing is constitutionally dedicated. So you play that, you have that concern, not only with pensions, but local government aid, state funding. All state funding is based on what's happening at the state.
Thank you very much. Questions? Ms. Becker.
Mr. Ranieri, if the savings is already committed to something, is it harder for the legislature to take it? If we have good things that we want to do with that money, do you think it plays out?
Madam Chair, the state has taken money from education, from local government aid, from transportation. Everybody gets a target and makes the reductions. And this committee took it in the pensions. So no, it doesn't make it any harder, I don't think, from my experience.
Any other questions? All right, that's some very interesting and good information. All right. Is there anyone else who would, do you want to say anything, Sam? I just want to make sure you have an opportunity.
Thanks, Chair
if you-
Tab, members of the committee. I would ask for additional clarification regarding the obligations associated with the police and fire pension following the change in the assumptions to 8%. What the net calculation was. I'm not sure that we had that information.
Based on the actuary reports from PARA, which we've received information in late July, distributed to the board on August 12th. For NPRA, the Closed Police Pension Fund, the annual amortization amount increased by $1,277,849, or $20,445,590 over the period from 2016 through 2031. For fire, which is a lot smaller fund and was much better funded before the merger, the annual amortization payment increase was $835,671. The 2016 through 2131 payment totaled $13,370,728. These annual amortization payments are all set to a certain degree by the amortization aids received for these two funds. And what's shown on the proposal is the levy amount required for the price, the property tax component of our updated amortization payment, which for police will total $8,890,272, and for fire will total $4,757,458 annually.
I would also like to clarify whether the amortization aid is a certified amount received from the state, or do we know that we're going to receive that amortization aid?
It's in a state statute. We never know if we're going to receive the LGA. We never know if we're going to receive anything from the state.
So as I understand it, Chair Tab and Mr. Qualley, the obligation to the city resulting from the elimination of the additional contribution of $2.2 million is offset by a $1.5 million increase in the police portion and $800,000 increase in the fire portion, some of which may be offset by an increase in the amortization aid.
Update the amortization aid, and if we were to suggest that we aren't going to receive any amortization aid, then we should significantly increase the budget. I mean,
Thank you.
If we do not reduce the levy by this amount, where does this money end up? Does it stay in the pension fund levy?
if it's levied in the pension fund levies, it stays in the pension fund levy and basically is managed as part of the pension management fund, which includes all three of those levies. And it could basically go to our item 3 on the agenda for enhanced yield component to offset future property tax reductions in the out years.
Okay. So we determine where that would go?
Yes.
Where we set the maximum determines where it could go. Where if the council adopts the maximum, that's where it goes. If the council adopts a lesser amount in those pension funds, then that's what goes to those pension funds.
Okay. So if we were to adopt the maximum, this 2.2 million could go into the pension fund.
If that's where it's set at the maximums. If that 2.2 million were moved to, for instance, the permanent improvement fund, then the council would have the opportunity, if they so wish, to have that in the permanent improvement fund, or if they didn't want it, they could, the final levies are set by the council for a lot of these levies, except for the park board and VET. But the rest of the levies, the final amounts are determined during the budget process with the council and then subject to the mayor's veto. But what we're addressing today is the maximums. It's potential that they could go where the maximums are set, but that decision's up to the council during the budget cycle.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think it's time. Does anyone have questions, or would we like to have some discussion at this point?
I have a question. It seems to me that what I heard you say, Jack, is that our role is to set the maximum levy, and when it comes to how the levy gets divided, the council has sort of the final say in terms of that. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, the board sets the maximums by these individual levies. For example, the board will set the maximum for the general fund. The board doesn't have any control over where the council allocates the general fund dollars. Hopefully they follow the mayor's guidance in her budget.
Yes.
But Jack, help me if I understand it. So if we were to reduce the pension levy by $2.2 million, and we were to increase the PI tax fund maximum levy by $2.2 million, the city council and mayor can come below that in the PI tax fund, not above it, obviously, but they can't shift it back over to pensions.
That's correct.
So we have to not, if we wanted to not levy this in the pension fund, we would have to choose the other levy that it would go to.
Correct. Now, the PI tax fund is a charter dedicated levy, and it goes to permanent improvement stuff. It doesn't go to operating stuff. So it's basically capital in nature. If the decision was made to increase the general fund, the general fund has a lot more latitude, and the general fund could transfer money to any other fund in the city, basically. But that would be up to the council and the mayor also.
I have an additional question. If we keep the 2.2 million in the pension levy there, and there is a balance left over, does that mean that in future years we don't have to levy as much?
What it means basically is under the current approach, the pension management fund,
I just need a yes or no on that, Jack.
in the out years, it would lower the pension property tax levy.
That's all I needed to hear. That was my
Yeah.
question. That's a clear answer. Thank you.
All right. I would venture to guess that there are six people up here and there are 6 different opinions on what we should do with this. So at this point, I would like to start a discussion, and let's sort of each just put something out on the table about where we are, and let's see if we can't come to some conclusion. Yes, Ms. Becker.
I've been talking for the last, I don't know how many years, about our capital infrastructure, specifically roads and parks. And I might throw a third one in there after talking to Councilmember Quincy last night, some city-owned buildings. Our capital infrastructure, if you look at our pavement condition index, is dropping like a rock. We haven't seen a complete study yet of what those costs would be to bring that back up to where it should have been. I've been asking for that, but I don't have it available for this conversation. I've asked the parks the same question, and the parks have put together a plan. And the parks are needing about $14 million a year. In the longer range city net debt bonding program, there's about 2.5. I haven't seen any numbers on what we need for city buildings. I would love to. But to me, we need to put money into infrastructure, and I would make a substitute motion that we split this money between the permanent tax levy for roads, and then also the other half would go into the parks. I'm not exactly sure how they levy it, Jack, the parks capital improvement is managed by the park board.
Basically, your motion would be to put part of the funding in the PI tax. The board can't designate within the PI tax fund where the council allocates the funding.
I understand that, but my substitute motion would be part in the PI tax fund.
And then with regards to the park board, they have statutory levies. They do not levy specifically for capital. There is a park and recreation levy, which is similar to the general fund levy, and they, within that park and recreation levy, can have segregated accounts depending on what their board does. And you typically see it in their presentations, and I'll see, say, park board capital levy, but that's a portion of the levy from their park and recreation fund levy.
I would still make the motion that we would have $1 million increase in the PI tax levy and $1 million increase in however, park general fund levy, with the understanding that that is going to be going for capital improvements for both of those systems.
Do I have a second? All right, I think we still then want discussion here. Okay, so here's one.
No, I got a second.
Did you? Okay, there's a second there. All right. That's John.
You were the second. No, I'm not. Oh, you're not the second.
Okay. All right. I don't have a second. I'd like to have some continued discussion. John, do you want to sort of give us any thoughts on what you would like to see happen here?
Well, at this point, I guess I'd just like to say that I understand Member Becker's perspective, and I concur that we should be reserving any levies for future considerations in the areas of infrastructure. But to that point, I believe there's a lot unknown at this point about what those amounts would be and what kind of contributions are needed. So I wouldn't be supporting Member Becker's motion because I think it's too prescriptive at this point with so many unknowns. Likewise, I wouldn't be supporting the council president's motion because at this point, I think the 3.4% levy is the appropriate amount that we should be levying for in anticipation of unknown and unexpected expenditures that would be required, that would go through our normal budget process, as well as the fact at this point, through the budget process, we haven't really determined what those long-term investments would be and what they're needed. So at that point, I would be in opposition to both of the substitute as well as the first substitute motion. But that's my perfect.
Okay, thank you.
My response is generally that the 3.4% levy is an appropriate levy and gives us the flexibility that we need to right-size the organization going out in the out years. And we can't take any of what you're considering savings and guaranteed money. I don't believe it falls into that category.
All right. Member Wheeler, would you like to sort of give us your perspective?
I will be supporting the 3.4% levy, but I want to say a couple of things that I think are really important. First of all, it's really frustrating that our legislature plays games with us regularly. It really is frustrating that our legislature plays games with us regularly. It keeps us from planning and doing a really good job on a whole bunch of fronts. Two, when we set a 3.4% levy, if that's in fact what we do, that is a maximum levy. The council doesn't have to spend that amount. They have the ability to reduce that amount. All we do is set the maximum, and it can be below that. And I'm hearing from some people that it is particularly important that it be below that, and they will have the opportunity, President Johnson at the council to make those arguments. I agree completely with